Welcome to Silver City Community Theater's Christmas Zoom production. Tonight we're presenting 3 Christmas classics: How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Gift of the Magi, and Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus. I'm Mary Ann Marlar. I'll be operating behind the scenes for you this evening. Silver City Community Theater was founded in 2014 following a Western Institute for Lifelong Learning acting class. Several members of that acting class came together to form SCCT. Our first project was A Twilight Christmas, an original play written by SCCT members. When you arrived, you saw a review of some of the many things we've done in the last 6 years. We had big plans for 2020. It was heartbreaking to postpone Exit Laughing and the other shows, workshops, and events. We're looking forward to doing everything we had planned eventually. But while social distancing lasts, SCCT will be on Zoom. Watch the newspapers, our website, Facebook, and Instagram for coming attractions. Perhaps tonight's Zoom performance will inspire you to join us. Want to act in a Zoom play? How about writing a play? There are many things to do with Silver City Community Theater, behind the scenes, on the stage, and on Zoom. Would you like to try your hand at costumes, set design and construction, computer technology, ushering? It takes a crew to make a show happen. And while deadlines can be hard, it isn't all work. We have a lot of fun, too. To join our theater and Zoom adventures, just go to the contact page at silvercitycommunitytheater.com. We're delighted you've chosen to attend tonight's Zoom production. Hopefully it won't be long before we can do live theater again. And in the meantime, be sure to mark your calendars for SCCT's coming attractions. SCCT has big plans for 2021. Look out for announcements of our Zoom performances, workshops, and hopefully we'll get back to live performances before the end of the year. To receive a reminder about all SCCT events, including auditions, get on our mailing list. Send your email address to contact@silvercitycommunitytheater.com. And now, SCCT presents 3 Christmas classics. How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Gift of the Magi, and Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus. Tonight's performers are Shelley Chase, Phyllis McQuaid, Greg Jarrett, and Mary Ann Marlar. Shelley Chase is Chelmo the Elf, our Christmas guide. She first started acting in Scrooge and Dickens last Christmas, and she reprised her roles again this year. She's been in 3 SCCT Zoom productions and says she'll keep on acting as long as they'll have me. Phyllis McQuaid, Silver City Community Theater Board President, will read Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Phyllis has been active in community theater in Silver City and in Maine for 20 years. She says acting is her passion. This is her second SCCT Zoom production. Greg Jarrett will read O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi. Greg has been on stage with the Virus Theater and SCCT and in Scrooge and Dickens. He also sings with the Silver Chorale. This is his second Zoom production. Mary Ann Marlar will read Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus. Her very first SCCT performance was in A Twilight Christmas as Mrs. Claus. This is her second Zoom production. And now, here's the Christmas show.
Everyone, Chelmo the Elf here, coming to you live from Santa's workshop. I don't make toys though. I'm a professional cookie taster. Turns out I have a natural talent for it. Oh, that reminds me. Do you know what gingerbread men use to cover their beds? Cookie sheets. Santa gave me the night off so I could be here to help Silver City Community Theater bring its fun Christmas show. We've got 3 Christmas classics for you. But first, do you know what a bird's favorite Christmas story is? How the Finch Stole Christmas. Now it's time to grab yourself a cookie and listen to festive Phyllis McQuaid reading How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss.
How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot. But the Grinch, who lived not just north of Whoville, did not. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now, please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be perhaps that his shoes were too tight. But I think that the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. But whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he stood there on Christmas Eve hating the Whos, staring down from his cave with a sour, Grinchly frown at the warm lighted windows below in their town. For he knew every Who down in Whoville beneath was busy now hanging a mistletoe wreath. And they're hanging their stockings, he snarled with a sneer. Tomorrow is Christmas. It's practically here. Then he growled with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming. I must find some way to stop Christmas from coming. For tomorrow, he knew, the girls and boys would wake bright and early. They'd rush for their toys. And then, oh, the noise, noise. That's one thing he hated. The noise. Then the Whos, young and old, would sit down to the feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast. They would feast on Who pudding and rare Who roast beast, which was something the Grinch couldn't stand in the least. And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, would stand close together with Christmas bells ringing. They'd stand hand in hand, and the Whos would start singing. They'd sing, and they'd sing, and the more the Grinch thought of this Who Christmas sing, the more the Grinch thought, I must stop this whole thing. Why, for 53 years, I put up with it now. I must stop the Christmas from coming. But how? Then he got an idea, an awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. I know just what to do, the Grinch laughed in his throat. And he made a quick Santa Claus hat and a coat. And he chuckled and clucked. What a great Grinchy trick. With this coat and this hat, I look just like Saint Nick. All I need is a reindeer. The Grinch looked around. But since reindeer are scarce, there was none to be found. Did that stop the old Grinch? No. The Grinch simply said, if I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead. So he called his dog Max, then he took some red thread, and he tied a big horn on the top of his head. Then he loaded some bags and some old empty sacks on a ramshackle sleigh, and he hitched up old Max. Then the Grinch said, giddy up, and the sleigh started down toward the homes where the Who lay a snooze in their town. All their windows were dark. Quiet snow filled the air. All the Whos were all dreaming, sweet dreams without care. When he came to the first little house on the square, this is stop number 1, the old Grinchy Claus hissed, and he climbed to the roof, empty bags in his fist. Then he slid down the chimney, a rather tight pinch. But if Santa could do it, then so could the Grinch. He got stuck only once, for a moment or two. Then he stuck his head out of the fireplace flue, where the little Who stockings all hung in a row. These stockings, he grinned, are the first things to go. Then he slithered and slunk with a smile most unpleasant around the whole room, and he took every present. Pop guns and bicycles, roller skates, drums, checkerboards, tricycles, popcorns, and plums. And he stuffed them in bags. Then the Grinch very nimbly stuffed all the bags one by one up the chimney. Then he slunk to the icebox. He took the Who's feast. He took the Who pudding, and he took the roast beast. He cleaned out that icebox as quick as a flash. Why, that Grinch even took their last can of Who hash. Then he stuffed all the food up the chimney with glee. And now, grinned the Grinch, I will stuff up the tree. And the Grinch grabbed the tree and started to shove when he heard a small sound like the coo of a dove. He turned around fast and he saw a small Who. Little Cindy Lou Who was not more than 2. The Grinch had been caught by this tiny Who daughter who'd got out of bed for a cup of cold water. She stared at the Grinch and said, Santa Claus, why? Why are you taking our Christmas tree? Why? But you know, that old Grinch was so smart and so slick. He thought up a lie, and he thought it up quick. Why, my sweet little tot, the fake Santa Claus said, there's a light on this tree that won't light on one side. So I'm taking it home to my workshop, my dear. I'll fix it up there, then I'll bring it back here. And his fib fooled the child. Then he patted her head, and he got her a drink, and he sent her to bed. And when Cindy Lou Who went to bed with her cup, he went to the chimney and stuffed the tree up. Then the last thing he took was the log from the fire. Then he went up the chimney himself, the old liar. On their walls he left nothing but hooks and some wire. And the one speck of food that he left in the house was a crumb that was even too small for a mouse. Then he did the same thing to the other Who's houses, leaving crumbs much too small for the other Who's mouses. It was 1/4 dawn. All the Who's were still abed. All the hills Who's still a snooze when he packed up his sled. Packed it up with their presents, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsel, the trimmings, the trappings. "3,000 feet up to the side of Mount Crumpet, he rode with his load to the tip top to dump it. Pooh-pooh to the Who's, he was grinchiously humming. They're finding out now that no Christmas is coming. They're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open a minute or two. Then the Who's down in Whoville will all cry boo-hoo." "That's a noise," grinned the Grinch, "that I simply must hear." So he paused, and the Grinch put his hand to his ear, and he paused, and he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, then it started to grow. But the sound wasn't sad. Why, the sound sounded merry. It couldn't be so, but it was very merry. He stared down at Whoville. The Grinch popped his eyes. Then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came just the same. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled 3 hours till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. And what happened then? Well, in Whoville they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. And the minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he whizzed with his load through the bright morning light, and he brought back the toys and the food for the feast. And he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beast. The end.
Love that story. Welcome Christmas while we stand heart to heart and hand in hand. I knew you wanted to hear me sing, so that was my gift to you. Don't you just love giving Christmas presents? My friend Frosty needed a place to keep his pennies, so I gave him a snowbank. Oh, hey, do you know how to tell when Santa is around? You can sense his presence. Speaking of presents, cuddle up now while Jolly Greg Jarrett reads The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry.
Perhaps you would like to hear a cute, poignant story of a young couple of modest means who were very much in love and who were willing to give up their most prized possession in order to get a Christmas present for each other. Well, all right then. The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing left to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, and which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on lookout for the mendacity squad. In the vestibule below was a letter box into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 a week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, the letters of Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powdered rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, with the result. $20 a week doesn't go far. The expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you've seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may be observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out of the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor with all his treasures piled in the basement, Jim would have pulled out that watch every time he passed just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now, Della, beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she cluttered out of the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofronie. Hair goods of all kinds. 1-8 up Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone, and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 78 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly, on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way to prudence and reason. She put out her curling irons and ignited the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generously added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his steps on the stair away down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow. He was only 22 and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat and he was out without gloves. Jim stepped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked about the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone," he said with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold. I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with a sudden nervous sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put on the chops, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. "For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1,000,000 a year, what is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on." Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going for a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change by hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs side and back that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned, and her heart had simply craved over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned her coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leapt up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh no!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly, upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs, and now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their home. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. Merry Christmas.
Remember when that same thing happened on Sesame Street? Bert traded in his paperclip collection to get a soap dish for Ernie's rubber ducky. And Ernie traded rubber ducky to get a cigar box for Bert's paperclips. I wonder if O. Henry got his idea from Sesame Street. Our last story tonight is about Santa. I can tell you some stories about Santa. For instance, do you know what we call him when he goes down a chimney while the fireplace is still lit? Crisp Kringle. Last year, I gave Santa a universal remote for Christmas. Know what he said? "This changes everything." His jokes aren't quite as good as mine, but I humor him. Anyway, back in 1897, Virginia O'Hanlon was 8 years old when she wrote a letter to the newspaper asking if Santa was real. Francis Church, the editor, wrote back. Here's Marianne Marlar reading, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus."
Good evening. In September of 1897, Francis Marcellus Church, lead editorial writer of the New York Sun, brother to the owner of the newspaper, graduate of Columbia College of Columbia University, son of an esteemed family from Rochester, New York, was rudely interrupted while writing an important letter about Darwinism and socialism. He was interrupted for a very trivial writing assignment indeed. He was asked to respond to some child's letter about Santa Claus. It was a ludicrous task, perhaps even a practical joke, since everyone knew he was a famous cynic. In fact, he took great pride in systematically battling silly superstitions and in bringing to the world a much needed skeptical viewpoint on all things spiritual. Nevertheless, he thought he could accomplish this minor task with ease and quickly return to his important letter. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, What would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus. But that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Have you ever seen fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But that is no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are, unseeable and unseen, in the world. You may tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside. But there is a veil that covers the unseen world that not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men who ever lived, could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture all the supernatural beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia. In all the world, there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. In 1,000 years, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. And that is how Francis Pharcellus Church came to write a Christmas editorial that has become a part of Christmas folklore and the most reprinted newspaper editorial in the English language.
Wow, we've learned a lot of important lessons tonight. We learned that Christmas isn't just about presents. We learned that Grinches aren't all bad. And that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it isn't real. Like love. You can't see it or touch it, but you sure can feel it. Silver City Community Theater wishes you lots of love this Christmas. Thank you for watching.